February 26, 1991. 73 Easting, Iraqi-Kuwaiti border, 15:30 hours. Through the thermal sight of his T-72 tank, Captain Khalid al-Obaidi scanned the desert horizon as a sandstorm reduced visibility to less than 400 meters. Around him, the Iraqi Republican Guard's Tawakkalna division sat in defensive positions, confident that the weather had rendered American advances impossible. The sandstorm was their shield. American tanks somewhere out there in the swirling dust would be as blind as they were. "They cannot see us," al-Obaidi told his crew over the intercom, "and we cannot see them. This storm is an equalizer. When it clears, we fight." His gunner, peering through the T-72's TPD-K1 rangefinder, nodded agreement. The Soviet-designed optical sight could barely penetrate 800 meters in clear conditions, far less in this maelstrom of sand. The Iraqi tanks were dug in, hull down, prepared for the Americans to emerge from the sandstorm at close range where Soviet armor and 8 years of combat experience against Iran might carry the day. They had fought in worse conditions. They knew how to wait. What Captain al-Obaidi didn't know, what none of the 18th Mechanized Brigade understood as they waited in their defensive positions, was that 3,200 meters away, more than 2 miles distant, every single vehicle in his brigade was already being observed with crystal clarity. Through thermal imaging systems that turned heat signatures into perfect pictures, American tank crews were counting hatches, identifying vehicle types, and preparing fire solutions with precision. The sandstorm that al-Obaidi believed was his protection had become his death sentence. He was visible while believing himself hidden, observed while thinking himself concealed. Before we show you what happened next, hit that like button and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you want more untold stories from military history, subscribe and ring that bell. The Americans were operating with technology the Iraqis didn't know existed. M1 Abrams tanks equipped with forward-looking infrared systems that could detect heat signatures at over 3,000 meters, night vision devices that transformed total darkness into green-lit daylight, fire control computers that calculated ballistic solutions faster than any human could aim. While Iraqi tankers strained to see through optical sights rendered useless by blowing sand, American crews saw the battlefield in perfect thermal clarity. The most devastating technological advantage of the Gulf War was revealing itself, not in armor thickness or gun range, but in the invisible infrared spectrum that allowed one army to see while the other remained blind. The transformation began decades earlier, driven by a Cold War imperative that would change warfare forever. On August 17, 1970, the United States Army began testing thermal imaging technology on the M1 prototype, the tank that would become the M1 Abrams. While the Soviet Union equipped its export tanks with active infrared systems that required illuminators, broadcasting their position to anyone with detection equipment, American engineers at Hughes Aircraft Company perfected passive forward-looking infrared technology that detected heat without emitting any signal whatsoever. The engineering team included Dr. Paul Cruz, who pioneered the cadmium-mercury telluride detector that made compact FLIR systems possible, and William Snodgrass, the principal thermal systems engineer, who solved the seemingly impossible challenge of stabilizing delicate infrared sensors in the violent environment of a moving tank. Their creation weighed 238 pounds and transformed every M1 Abrams into a hunter that owned the night. The AN-VSG-2 tank thermal sight, developed by Texas Instruments and later produced by Raytheon, operated in the 8 to 12 micrometer wavelength, detecting the infrared radiation emitted by all objects above absolute zero. At 3x magnification, the system could detect a tank-sized heat signature at 3,000 meters. At 10x magnification, it could identify specific vehicle types and conduct precision engagement at ranges where Iraqi optical sights saw only darkness, smoke, or sand. The real revolution lay in thermal imaging itself. Unlike image intensification systems that amplified existing visible light and required some illumination to function, FLIR systems detected heat signatures directly. They worked equally well in total darkness, through smoke, fog, and sandstorms. While Iraqi tank sites required visible light or active infrared illumination that broadcast their position, American thermal sights delivered clear imagery in conditions that rendered conventional optics completely useless. August 2, 1990. Iraq invaded Kuwait with an army the Western media called formidable, the fourth largest military force on Earth, battle-hardened from 8 brutal years of war with Iran. Over 5,500 tanks, many of them Soviet T-72s that Western intelligence assessed as capable adversaries. Saddam Hussein's Republican Guard was considered among the best-trained armored forces outside NATO and the Warsaw Pact. Saddam Hussein's confidence in his military stemmed from recent experience and calculated Western miscalculation. In a February 1990 speech to the Arab Cooperation Council, Saddam had declared with absolute certainty, "The United States knows that it cannot cross our borders. They are afraid of casualties. Our land forces are strong. Our equipment is tested in 8 years of real combat. American soldiers train in peace. We are warriors tempered in war." During the Iran-Iraq War, Iraqi armor had faced Iranian forces that lacked night vision capability and had learned to fight in limited visibility using flares, searchlights, and dawn attacks. Iraqi commanders believed they understood the rhythms of mechanized warfare. Artillery preparation, dawn advances, close-range tank duels, decided by crew training and nerve. The Iraqi Republican Guard, considered Saddam's elite force, trained on equipment that represented 1970s Soviet export technology. Their T-72M and T-72M1 models came equipped with TPDK-1 optical sights with infrared searchlights for night fighting. These active infrared systems required the tank to emit invisible light that could be detected by any force with infrared detection equipment, essentially broadcasting "I am here" to anyone looking. Effective range in daylight, 2,000 meters maximum. Effective range at night using active infrared, 800 to 2,200 meters while completely compromising concealment. Effective range in a sandstorm, less than 400 meters. Iraqi tank doctrine, inherited from Soviet advisors and adapted through years of combat against Iran, emphasized prepared defensive positions, concentrated fire, and unit cohesion. The Iraqis had built extensive fortifications along the Kuwaiti-Saudi border, dug their tanks into revetments that reduced their profile, and positioned their armor in depth. According to captured Iraqi battle plans, their commanders expected the Americans to attack in daylight, following the traditional patterns of mechanized warfare they had studied at Soviet military academies and experienced against Iranian armor. "We were told the Americans were soft," a captured Iraqi tank officer, Lieutenant Basim al-Takriti, told coalition interrogators after the Battle of Norfolk. That they relied on expensive technology because their soldiers lacked the courage for close combat. That when we met them in the desert, man to man and steel to steel, American training could not match our 8 years of real war. No one told us about their night vision. No one told us they could see through sandstorms. No one told us we would be fighting blind while they had perfect vision. A January 1991 Iraqi Republican Guard intelligence report, captured after the Battle of 73 Easting and later declassified, stated with fatal confidence, "American M1 tank possesses superior gun and possibly superior mobility. However, armor protection is unproven against T-72 ammunition at close range. American crews lack combat experience and are trained in artificial exercise conditions, not real war." Recommendation: Iraqi forces should engage at night or in limited visibility conditions where American technological advantages are neutralized. Extensive use of smoke and dust should be employed to reduce American precision fire advantage and force close-range engagements where Iraqi combat experience will prove decisive. The assessment was fatally, catastrophically flawed. It assumed that limited visibility would affect both sides equally, as it had in the Iran-Iraq War, where neither side possessed advanced thermal imaging. Iraqi intelligence had no concept of the thermal imaging revolution that had occurred in Western militaries during the 1980s, no framework to understand that the Americans could see heat signatures through conditions that rendered optical sights completely useless. The mathematics of the technological gap were staggering, though the Iraqis wouldn't understand the numbers until they were dying and burning tanks. Detection range, tank-size target, daylight, clear conditions, Iraqi T-72 TPDK-1, optical sight, 2,000 meters maximum U.S., M1A1 thermal sight, 3,000 plus meters with target identification, detection range, tank size target, total darkness, Iraqi T-72 active infrared system, 800 meters while broadcasting detectable IR signature, U.S. M1A1 thermal sight, 3,000 plus meters, completely passive undetectable detection range, tank size target, sandstorm conditions, Iraqi T-72 optical sight, 400 meters or less, often zero visibility U.S. M1A1 thermal sight, 2,500 plus meters, essentially unaffected by airborne dust. Target engagement time from initial detection to firing, trained crew, Iraqi T-72, 25 to 30 seconds, manual range finding, manual ballistic computation, U.S. M1A1, 7 to 10 seconds, laser range finding, digital fire control computer first round hit probability at 2,000 meters, Iraqi T-72, 30 to 40% against stationary target in daylight U.S., M1A1, 85 to 90% against moving target in any visibility condition. The Americans weren't just better equipped, they possessed the ability to fight a war in a sensory dimension the Iraqis couldn't access, like a boxer fighting a blind opponent. The contest was over before it began, but the Iraqis didn't know it yet. February 24, 1991, auto 400 hours. The ground war began with a massive armored thrust into Iraq. The 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment, leading the advance of 7 Corps, moved eastward through the desert toward the Republican Guard divisions that represented Saddam's strategic reserve. Captain H.R. McMaster, commanding Eagle Troop, 2nd Squadron, 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment, led his 9 M1A1 Abrams tanks and 13 M3 Bradley cavalry fighting vehicles through the featureless desert, navigating by GPS receivers that Iraqi forces didn't possess and couldn't imagine. His unit's mission was clear: locate forward elements of the Republican Guard, fix them in place, and allow heavier armored divisions to pass through for the decisive engagement that would destroy Saddam's best forces. By February 26th, Eagle Troop had been advancing for 52 hours through a sandstorm that reduced natural visibility to near zero. For Iraqi forces monitoring the American advance through their optical sights, the Americans should have been blind, fumbling forward, vulnerable to carefully prepared ambushes. Instead, McMaster's unit moved with absolute confidence, maintaining perfect formation, avoiding Iraqi scout positions, advancing directly toward Republican Guard formations that believed themselves concealed by weather and terrain. At 15:30 hours, Eagle Troop crossed the 73 Easting Grid Line, a north-south coordinate used for navigation in the featureless desert, and crested a low rise in the terrain. Through his M1A1's thermal sight, McMaster saw what would become one of the most one-sided engagements in the history of armored warfare. Contact. Armored vehicles, hull down, 3,200 meters. His gunner, Staff Sergeant Craig Koch, reported calmly, the thermal sight displaying Iraqi T-72s and BMP infantry fighting vehicles in perfect clarity, despite the sandstorm that had reduced optical visibility to less than 500 meters. The Iraqi vehicles showed as bright white shapes against the cooler desert background, every detail visible through the thermal imaging: turret orientation, engine compartment heat signature, the number of crew hatches, even the slight temperature difference that revealed which vehicles had been running longer. The Iraqi 18th Mechanized Brigade, dug in and waiting, had absolutely no idea the Americans had arrived. What followed over the next 23 minutes would later be described by military historians as the most technologically lopsided armored engagement since the invention of the tank, a battle that would fundamentally change how the world thought about armored warfare. McMaster's first 120mm Sabot round from his M1A1, Mad Max, struck an Iraqi T-72 at 3,200 meters, a distance at which the Iraqi crew couldn't even detect the American tank through the sandstorm, let alone return fire. The depleted uranium penetrator, traveling at 5 feet per second, punched through the T-72's side turret armor and detonated the ammunition stored in the crew compartment. The Iraqi tank exploded, turret blown 15 feet into the air. The crew never saw what killed them. Across the battlefield, Eagle Troop's 9 M1A1s engaged targets in rapid sequence. Every shot was calculated by fire control computers that factored in range, target movement, wind speed, ammunition type, and barrel wear. Every shot was aimed at targets the Iraqis couldn't see, fired by crews who could see their enemies with perfect clarity. Depleted uranium sabot rounds crossed the desert in seconds, impacting Iraqi armor before the Iraqi crews could even traverse their turrets toward threats they couldn't locate. They never returned effective fire, Captain McMaster later told Army debriefers in an after-action report that would be studied at military academies for decades. Some of the Iraqi tanks fired in random directions, shooting at sounds or guessing at our positions based on where their comrades were exploding. But they couldn't see us. The thermal advantage was total. It wasn't a battle in any traditional sense. It was a shooting exercise against stationary targets whose crews didn't know they were being engaged until the rounds hit and their vehicles exploded. As the battle developed, other American units joined Eagle Troops' engagement. M2 Bradley cavalry fighting vehicles fired Tau missiles at Iraqi infantry positions, their thermal sights allowing gunners to identify individual soldiers attempting to deploy anti-tank weapons at ranges where the Iraqis saw only swirling sand. Attack helicopters from the 2nd Squadron's aviation element arrived overhead, their pilots using helmet-mounted thermal displays to identify and destroy Iraqi vehicles attempting to reposition or flee. The Iraqi crews, trained in Soviet doctrine, refined through 8 years of combat against Iran, attempted to generate concealing smoke, a tactic that had worked against Iranian forces who lacked thermal imaging. Smoke generators on the T-72s pumped white phosphorus into the air, creating dense clouds that would have completely blinded optical sights. Through thermal imaging, American crews watched Iraqi tanks hiding in their own smoke, the hot engine compartments and gun barrels glowing like beacons against the cooler smoke. The protection they had generated made them easier targets, not harder to see. One captured Iraqi tank commander, Captain Nasir al-Khazraji of the Tawakkalna Division's 9th Armored Battalion, described the battle from inside his T-72 in a coalition intelligence debriefing. "We heard explosions. Tanks to our left were burning, then tanks to our right. We could see nothing through the storm. My gunner traversed the turret left and right, searching desperately for targets through the sight. We saw only sand and smoke. We fired at muzzle flashes when we could see them, at sounds, at nothing. Then something struck us. I don't know what. I never saw it coming. The tank filled with fire instantly. I escaped through the commander's hatch. My crew did not make it out. I ran into the storm, completely blind, and found Americans. They had lights on their helmets, green lights. They saw me long before I saw them. They captured me without firing a shot. Later, they showed me photographs, thermal photographs. They could see our entire brigade from 3,000 meters away. Every tank, every position, every movement. We were completely blind, and they could see everything. We never had a chance." By the time the sandstorm cleared at 1800 hours, the killing was finished. In 23 minutes of combat, Eagle Troop and supporting units from 2nd Squadron had systematically destroyed 85 Iraqi tanks, predominantly T-72s with some older T-55s, 44 armored personnel carriers, and BMP infantry fighting vehicles, 14 anti-aircraft artillery systems, 28 trucks and support vehicles, multiple ammunition storage points, Iraqi casualties, over 600 killed in action, 865 prisoners of war taken American casualties, 0 killed in action, 1 M1A1 damaged by Iraqi T-72 fire at close range with crew surviving, 1 M2 Bradley destroyed by a lucky T-72 hit with 3 wounded crew members evacuated. The kill ratio exceeded 80-1. The entire engagement had lasted less than half an hour. It wasn't combat. It was systematic destruction of an enemy that couldn't fight back effectively. The Battle of 73 Easting was not an anomaly or a lucky engagement. Across the IC, Kuwaiti theater of operations, American and British thermal superiority produced similar catastrophic results for Iraqi forces again and again. At the Battle of Medina Ridge on February 27, 1991, the 2nd Brigade, 1st Armored Division engaged the Medina Division of the Republican Guard, supposedly Saddam's best-trained and best-equipped armored force, in a night battle. Through complete darkness that should have been a tactical equalizer, American M1A1s detected and systematically destroyed over 186 Iraqi tanks and 127 armored personnel carriers in approximately 2 hours of combat. Iraqi return fire was sporadic, wildly inaccurate, and almost completely ineffective. The Iraqi gunners were shooting blindly at sounds and occasional muzzle flashes, while American crews calmly engaged targets displayed in thermal clarity on their sights, each kill requiring an average of 1.3 rounds. Lieutenant Colonel James Riley, commanding 3rd Battalion, 67th Armor Regiment during the Battle of Medina Ridge, described the engagement in terms that shocked Pentagon analysts reviewing after-action reports. It was surreal, like a video game, except the targets were real and they were dying. My gunner could see Iraqi tanks attempting to reposition in total darkness at 2,500 meters. We were engaging, hitting with first-round accuracy, destroying T-72s that never saw us. They were firing back, but blindly. Rounds were impacting 50 or 100 meters to our sides, sometimes behind us. Some Iraqi tanks tried to run, which just made them better targets as their engines heated up from high-speed movement. The thermal advantage made it murder, not combat. I've never felt anything like it. Absolute dominance mixed with an uncomfortable awareness that the enemy couldn't effectively fight back. Even when Iraqi forces successfully closed the range in an attempt to engage American armor at distances where their optical sights functioned adequately, thermal imaging proved brutally decisive. At the Battle of Norfolk on February 27th, when Iraqi T-72s from the Adnan Division successfully approached to within 200 meters of American positions under cover of smoke and pre-dawn darkness, a range at which Iraqi guns could theoretically penetrate M1A1 armor, American crews detected them through the smoke and darkness, acquired firing solutions, and destroyed the Iraqi tanks before they could effectively return fire. Of 44 Iraqi tanks that approached coalition positions, 43 were destroyed. The single surviving T-72 retreated with heavy damage. British Challenger 1 tanks, also equipped with advanced thermal sights, achieved similar dominance against Iraqi armor. On February 26, 1991, a Challenger 1 from the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards achieved what remains the longest-range tank-versus-tank kill in military history. 4,700 meters against an Iraqi T-55. The British gunner, using thermal sights, detected and identified the Iraqi tank at nearly 3 miles distance, through haze and dust, calculated the ballistic solution accounting for the extreme range, and destroyed it with a single HESH, high-explosive squash head, round. The Iraqi crew never knew they were being engaged. They died instantly, never seeing their killers. Throughout the 100-hour ground war, the pattern repeated across every single armor engagement, from small skirmishes to major battles. Total coalition tank losses to Iraqi armor fire, 23 vehicles. Total Iraqi tank losses to coalition forces, over 3,700 vehicles confirmed destroyed, hundreds more abandoned. The kill ratio in armor versus armor engagements exceeded 160 to 1. No previous war in human history had seen such a one-sided technological advantage produce such catastrophic results for one side. It wasn't combat. It was technological massacre. The psychological impact on Iraqi forces was profound and devastating. Soldiers who survived the initial engagements spread stories throughout the Iraqi ranks of an enemy that fought like supernatural beings. American tanks that appeared from nowhere through sandstorms and darkness killed with impossible accuracy at impossible ranges and vanished before Iraqi gunners could respond. Helicopter attacks in total darkness, with Iraqi anti-aircraft crews unable to see the aircraft that destroyed them with precision missiles. Infantry raids conducted by soldiers who walked through Iraqi positions with perfect vision, while Iraqi defenders remained completely blind. A captured Iraqi artillery officer, Major Hamid al-Shahid, told American interrogators at a coalition detention facility in Kuwait City. Our entire doctrine, everything we learned from Soviet advisors and 8 years fighting Iran, assumed both sides saw equally well or equally poorly. When the Americans attacked at night, we expected to hear them coming, to use our searchlights, to engage them at close range with RPGs and machine guns, where superior numbers and defensive positions would matter. Instead, they walked through our positions with their night vision, shot us from distances we couldn't respond to, and disappeared before dawn. Soldiers started calling them jinn, spirits from the desert. How do you fight what you cannot see? How do you maintain morale when your weapons cannot reach an enemy that kills you at will? We didn't surrender because we were cowards. We surrendered because fighting was pointless. The Republican Guard, supposedly Iraq's elite forces, dissolved after the first major engagements with coalition armor. Units that had fought Iran for 8 brutal years, that had been considered professional and experienced by Western intelligence, abandoned their equipment and fled after encountering American forces in night or limited visibility combat. The technology gap had broken their will to fight more effectively than any amount of firepower could have achieved. After the war, intelligence assessments confirmed the gap. U.S. Army Report. GW 91043. Iraqi sensors catastrophically inferior. Detection range 1/3 of U.S. systems in daylight, 1/5 in limited visibility. Multiple captured officers expressed complete surprise at coalition thermal capability. Discovery came too late to adjust tactics. Soviet assessment. American thermal advantage represents paradigm shift. Force with thermal superiority engages beyond opponent's detection range. Recommend immediate highest priority for Russian thermal development. By the late 1990s, Russia and China initiated crash programs to catch up, spending billions to reach 1991 American capability. Production statistics revealed American investment in night dominance, M1 Abrams with thermals, 1848 vehicles, 100% coverage, M2 M3 Bradleys with thermals, 2200 plus vehicles, 100% coverage, AN PVS-7 night vision goggles, 10,000 plus sets, thermal weapon sights, 5,000 plus units attack helicopters with FLIR, 277 AH-64 Apaches cost per thermal sight, $78,000, $1991. Total investment, 500 plus million Iraqi night vision capability, under 5% of forces Iraqi optical sight cost, under 5,000 per tank. Iraq chose quantity. America chose quality that proved decisive. The Gulf War established fundamental principles for modern armored warfare. Military theorists divide tank combat into before thermal imaging and after. The U.S. Armor School at Fort Knox revised doctrine in 1992. The side that owns the night owns the battlefield. Thermal imaging provides decisive advantage outweighing armor or gun performance. Forces without thermal capability should avoid night combat against thermal-equipped opponents. The German Bundeswehr made thermals mandatory on all Leopard 2s. Their 1993 manual stated, Iraqi T-72s possessed armor and guns capable of destroying M1 A1s. However, inability to detect American tanks rendered advantages irrelevant. German doctrine prioritizes thermal imaging equal to firepower and protection. Modern conflicts validated these lessons. In 2003, Iraq, coalition thermal superiority again proved decisive. In 2022, Ukraine, Russian forces lacking modern thermals suffered devastating losses to Ukrainian forces using Western thermal systems, achieving kill ratios reminiscent of 1991. The lesson learned in Kuwaiti desert has been relearned worldwide. Forces without thermal parity cannot survive against opponents who own the night. American thermal imaging superiority represents a victory in the electromagnetic spectrum more decisive than advantages in armor or firepower. Iraqi crews fought partially blind, discovering too late that every American tank possessed ability to see through conditions that left them sightless. The AN/VSG-2 thermal sight transformed the M1A1 from capable tank into apex predator owning the night. This proved more decisive than any armor or gun improvement. Every M1A1 carried victory not primarily in its 120mm cannon or composite armor, but in 238 pounds of thermal imaging letting crews see what enemies could not. General Schwarzkopf told the Joint Chiefs, "The Iraqis brought the fourth largest army to Kuwait. We brought the future of warfare. Thermal imaging gave us access to a dimension they couldn't enter. When one side sees and the other is blind, it's not combat, it's execution." Lieutenant General Rod al-Hamdani, Republican Guard II Corps commander, wrote in his memoir, "We prepared to fight Americans like we fought Iranians. We expected courage, training, experience to matter. Instead, we fought ghosts killing us from ranges we couldn't return fire. They destroyed us at night when we were helpless. They saw through sandstorms that blinded us completely. When enemy sees you perfectly and you cannot see them, numbers don't matter. Training doesn't matter. Experience doesn't matter. Courage doesn't matter. You simply die, wondering where shots came from. If I could speak to young officers today, never fight an enemy with sensor superiority unless you have no choice. You will lose, your soldiers will die, and you'll never understand how until too late. Americans taught us this lesson cruelly. We paid with thousands of lives of soldiers who died fighting enemies they couldn't see. The thermal advantage established in 1991 remains foundation of American military dominance. Modern M1A2 SEPV3s carry second-generation FLIR with 5,000-plus meter detection. Infantry carry AN/PVS-14 goggles as standard. Helicopters, drones, aircraft all possess advanced thermal imaging. Modern warfare is true 24-hour cycle. Forces without advanced sensors cannot compete. Darkness, once refuge and equalizer, has become hunting ground for those who see clearly through it. Iraqi military's failure to recognize American sensor superiority stands as the Gulf War's most significant intelligence failure. Despite weeks of buildup, despite opportunity to observe American equipment, Iraqi intelligence never grasped thermal imaging's revolutionary significance. They prepared for symmetrical visibility war, where traditional tactics remained relevant. Americans fought entirely different war. One where they possessed permanent total awareness while enemies fumbled in technological blindness. In the end, infrared radiation detected by American thermal sights proved more powerful than armor-piercing rounds from Iraqi 125mm guns. The ability to see clearly when enemy could not, to fight with perfect awareness while opponents operated blind, to own the night absolutely. This invisible advantage determined victory more surely than any visible superiority in numbers, armor, or firepower. Thermal imaging superiority changed warfare forever, establishing that in modern combat, sensors matter more than shooters, information dominance trumps platform superiority, and the side that can see will always defeat the side that is blind. Captain Khalid al-Obaidi survived 73 easting, escaping his burning T-72 during the sandstorm he thought would protect him. In a 2001 interview, he reflected, "For 23 minutes, I believed we were fighting soldiers like ourselves, men who could see as far as we could, who struggled with the same sandstorm, who were as vulnerable as we were. Then I escaped my burning tank and saw the Americans, calm, professional, efficient, moving with absolute confidence through sandstorm that left us blind. They could see clearly. We never saw them once until it was over." People ask what it was like fighting Americans in 1991. I tell them truth. We didn't fight them. To fight requires both sides to engage. They executed us, professionally, efficiently, without emotion, simply because they could see and we could not. That's the only answer that matters. Everything else, our training, experience, courage, equipment, became irrelevant the moment Americans demonstrated they could see us clearly while we remained blind. The war was over before we knew it had begun.